Welcome, curious minds, to another special installment of our Quran by AI series on the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a truly profound journey, an in-depth exploration of chapter 21 of the Quran, Al-Anbiya, which means the prophets.
That's right. And this chapter, it's got 112 verses, and it really offers a powerful look into the very core tenets of the Quranic message.
What's particularly striking about Al-Anbiya, and you see this noted in various scholarly commentaries, is its central focus. It seems to revolve around humanity's struggle with belief.
Especially when confronted by the prophets, their divine messages, and specifically the foretelling of the end of days. It's this theme of incredulity.
And despite the multitude of things it covers, there's a surprisingly clear structure that emerges. It looks like sort of a three-part structure.
It does. It guides us through a really compelling narrative and quite an illuminating discussion, a polemical discourse even.
So, our mission today is to unpack these layers. We'll be drawing rich insights directly from those scholarly commentaries to understand what makes Al-Anbiya so significant for you, the diligent learner.
Think of it as getting right to the heart of this pivotal chapter.
Okay, let's dive into the first section then. This covers verses 1 through 47, and right away, this part sets a pretty stark tone.
It really does. It immediately confronts us with this idea of the impending reckoning and, well, the often stubborn incredulity of humanity.
Verse 1 kicks it off with a powerful warning, the nearing of the end of times.
Yes, and the commentaries often highlight the term hisag. It means the account.
The account signifies that detailed divine reckoning of human actions, right? On the day of judgment.
Exactly. And these actions, the text suggests, are meticulously pre-recorded in a celestial book. It's a concept that resonates, actually, in various ancient spiritual traditions.
And the Arabic verb used there, ikaraba, draws nigh. It's more than just time getting shorter, isn't it?
It is. It implies a state of being closer to your destination than your origin. It's quite a profound statement, temporally and theologically.
It makes you think, for God, this reckoning is eternally present in his knowledge. But for us humans,
For humanity, it often seems distant, maybe even abstract. And that contrast really invites you, the listener, to consider your own perception of time and accountability.
and it brings up a crucial point, too. Regardless of when the world ends, your individual death is certain. That's like a personal reckoning.
A personal reckoning every soul inevitably faces. And some Sufi commentaries, interestingly, distinguish between different kinds of heedlessness.
Oh.
Yeah, there's the common kind, being engrossed in worldly things. But then there's a more subtle heedlessness for the hereafter, which can paradoxically come from being so deeply absorbed in the remembrance of God that the hereafter feels less like a future event.
And more like a constant reality.
Exactly, an ever-present reality.
Then in verse 2, the Quran calls itself a dhikr, reminder.
A reminder, yes. It's a self-referential term that emphasizes its purpose and its continuity with earlier divine revelations. It's not claiming to be entirely novel in its core message.
And that phrase, they listened to it while they played, that's quite vivid.
It really highlights the oral nature of the Quran's initial reception and the sheer heedlessness of the disbelievers. They're treating this serious divine message almost like amusement.
Just background noise.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Then verses 3 and 5 get quite polemical. The commentaries show the Quran directly quoting the adversary's accusations against the prophet.
What sort of things were they saying?
Well, he's accused of practicing magic, of being nearly human, Bashar, a poet. For here, these were common labels.
And those weren't the only ones, right? I recall reading about others.
No, there's a whole set. Fabricator, iftirahu, liar, kadhab, possessed, majnun, even being aided or taught by others, darasta. They threw everything at him.
What strikes me as a merely human accusation. It seems like that specific charge pops up again and again throughout prophetic history.
It does. It echoes challenges faced by earlier prophets, like Noah. Scholars actually have a term for this shared experience, monoprophetism. It highlights these consistent patterns of disbelief prophets encountered.
Interesting. And there's that textual detail in verse 4.
Ah, yes, the use of qual, he said, instead of the usual divine command qual, say.
What do scholars make of that?
Some suggest it might point to an active redactional process, perhaps a time when the distinctions between what we now categorize as Quran and Hadith were, let's say, less sharply defined. It's a subtle point, but intriguing.
And the charge of confused dreams in verse 5.
It highlights the incoherence of their own arguments. I mean, how can something be both a confused dream and something deliberately fabricated? The claims contradict each other.
Right. And their demand for a sign like those of old, it just seems obstinate.
Completely. As if the Quran's own eloquence and proofs weren't miracle enough. It shows a fundamental resistance, a refusal to engage with the evidence right in front of them.
Okay, so this leads into the next part, verses 6 through 15, where the Quran starts drawing lessons from past generations.
Exactly. It functions as a kind of argument supporting the Prophet's mission by drawing these historical parallels.
Verse 7, for instance, emphasizes that previous messengers were also human beings who received revelation.
And that serves as a real consolation for the Prophet, affirming the human nature of prophethood. It counters that merely human accusation directly.
Some commentaries debate if verse 7 implies all messengers were male,
But figures like Mary, mentioned elsewhere in the Quran, certainly complicate a rigid interpretation like that. The focus seems to be on their humanity and receiving revelation.
and that key phrase in verse 7, people of the reminder, ol hazir, who does that refer to?
It's interpreted in a few ways. It could mean learned Jews and Christians who could confirm from their scriptures that God always sent human prophets. Or it could refer to those who know the Quran itself, since the Quran is also called al-Dhikr, the reminder. And some Sufi interpretations broaden it further to those who truly understand the inner realities of divine remembrance.
Deep layers there. Verse 8 reinforces the point about prophets being human. They ate food, had normal needs.
Right, dispelling any notions of them being superhuman. And the promise mentioned in verse 9.
That refers to God's commitment, right? To save his prophets and deal with their opponents.
Precisely. And verse 10 adds another layer to Dhikr, the reminder. It says the Quran contains your nobility or stature.
Meaning?
It could mean renown or virtue for those who follow it. Or, more spiritually, the very act of finding life, finding elevation through remembering God.
Then verses 11 to 15 shift focus slightly to the consequences of that disbelief.
Yes, the inevitability of divine punishment for persistent hostility. It recounts this pattern. Verse 11 asks that rhetorical question, how many a town engaged in wrongdoing have we shattered?
Underscoring that historical pattern, commentaries link it to specific places.
Like Thatur in Yemen? Yes.
Yeah.
But it also carries that spiritual meaning. God shattering the hardened, transgressing heart.
And verse 12 describes people fleeing when they felt our might, a very human reaction.
Instinctive. But then verse 13 delivers this powerful, almost ironic taunt from God or the angels. Don't run away, go back to your luxuries, back to your homes. Maybe you'll be questioned there.
Highlighting the futility of escape, the inescapability of judgment. Their worldly attachments are useless.
Utterly useless. Their eventual cry in verse 14, oh, woe unto us, truly we have been wrongdoers. It comes far too late.
And the description in verse 15, a moanin field, stilled.
Like an extinguished flame. All their defiance, all their pursuits, just reduced to nothing. It's a potent warning.
Shifting gears now, verses 16 through 29 seem to build this strong theological case for God's uniqueness and transcendence.
Absolutely. It underpins the whole message of the chapter. Verse 16 presents God as the singular creator of everything, heaven and earth, and whatsoever is between them. This totality.
Echoing themes found in Genesis and other ancient cosmogonies?
Yes, but with a crucial clarification in verses 16 and 17. This creation wasn't just in play or for diversion.
Meaning it has a purpose.
A divine purpose. It challenges any idea of a capricious or indifferent deity. We see this elsewhere in the Quran too. The purpose is tied to testing human conduct and leading ultimately to the adoration of God.
And verse 18 draws that sharp line between truth, and falsehood, Bile.
With truth crushing falsehood, the idea is that truth has inherent power. It's linked to God himself, to the revelation, and that unique word, fayad maguhu,
It crushes it.
literally breaks its head. It emphasizes a decisive, almost violent vanquishing of falsehood by truth.
Then verses 19 and 20 contrast the arrogance of disbelievers with the humility of true worshipers.
Using angels as the prime example, they continuously glorify God, never tiring. It's an ideal, of course, unattainable for humans in that literal sense, but it represents that spiritual goal of constant devotion.
Like breathing for them.
Exactly. It's essential to their being.
Then we get to the core Quranic message. Divine oneness, Tawhid, in verses 21 to 25.
Powerfully articulated here. Verse 22 uses that logical argument. If there were multiple gods, the heavens and earth would surely have been corrupted.
Because conflicting wills would lead to chaos.
Precisely. It's an argument for necessary unity in the divine source of an ordered cosmos. Interestingly, some commentaries note parallels to arguments made by early Christian thinkers like Tantius or Athanasius against polytheism,
And verses 24 and 25 again use terms like our reminder and revelation.
underscoring that the Quran has reiterated this fundamental monotheistic message found in all previous authentic revelations. It's a consistent thread.
Verse 23 makes a strong statement about sovereignty. God isn't questioned, but everyone else is.
Yes, emphasizing divine authority and human accountability. It touches on deep questions about purpose, free will, predestination. Big theological territory.
And that challenge in verse 24, bring me your proof.
It's a direct demand for evidence against God's oneness. It essentially says, if you have a logical basis for polytheism, present it. A recurring challenge in the Quran.
Then verses 26 to 29 tackle a specific claim. The compassionate has taken a child.
A direct refutation. Commentaries generally link this to Christian beliefs about Jesus, or sometimes to the pagan Quraysh belief that angels were daughters of God.
And the Quran's response.
It asserts these supposed children are merely honored servants, identified usually as angels.
Why angels?
Two reasons given. First, the plural servants rules out as a singular son. Second, verse 27 describes them as acting only by God's command, never preceding him in speech. They are created as subservient beings.
Not divine offspring. It's interesting that both sides use the term al-Rahman, the compassionate.
It suggests the debate wasn't necessarily about the name of God, but about his nature specifically, whether he has partners or offspring. The shared term indicates some common ground in the conception of a powerful, merciful deity, but a fundamental disagreement on oneness.
And these servants, the angels, they have knowledge but limited power.
Verse 28 says, they know things, but can only intercede with God's permission, and they act out of fear or awe of him. Definitely not attributes of divinity.
Verse 29 provides the warning.
A stark warning.
Yeah.
Anyone claiming divinity for themselves or others besides God faces hell. A clear deterrent against polytheism or self-deification.
Okay. From the nature of God, the chapter then shifts focus in verses 30 to 33, inviting contemplation of the cosmos itself.
Yes, presenting the universe as a collection of divine signs, ayat. It's aimed at those who disbelieve, urging them to look around and see the evidence.
Verse 30 has that striking image. The heavens and the earth were sewn together, like a single mass.
Radquan, a joint entity. And then, we rent them asunder, farakahuma. That verb emphasizes a unique, powerful act of separation, echoing ancient cosmologies but framing it within divine action.
And the statement immediately following, we made every living thing from water.
Hugely significant. It highlights water's absolute centrality to life, a concept found in other ancient texts too. Some classical interpretations even linked it to reproductive fluids. It underscores how the world's order meets fundamental human needs.
Then verses 31 and 32 talk about mountains stabilizing the earth.
Lest it shake beneath them, and creating paths for guidance. It paints a picture of a stable, navigable world designed for habitation. The mountains, in some commentaries, are seen as pegs anchoring the earth. Night and day, the sun and the moon each gliding in an orbit. It emphasizes the perfect order and predictability of the cosmos. Commentaries discuss pre-modern cosmological views of spheres, but always acknowledge ultimate knowledge rests with God.
This cosmological reflection then leads back to a very personal reality in verses 34 to 41, the inevitability of death and judgment.
A natural progression. It brings the focus back to the human condition. Verse 34 directly addresses the prophet's mortality.
We have not ordained perpetual life for any human being before thee, so if thou diest, will they abide forever.
It counters the disbeliever's focus on his human limitations. And verse 35 states that universal truth, every soul shall taste death.
That tasting suggests more than just cessation, perhaps the experience leading up to it.
Commentaries suggest that yes, the sufferings preceding death. Sufi interpretations see life itself as a continuous process of dying, a constant transformation.
And life itself is described as a test, fitna, in verse 35.
A test of both evil and good, sickness and health, poverty and wealth, error and guidance. It tests our gratitude in good times, our patience in adversity. It's about how you respond.
Verses 36 to 38 return to the mockery the prophet faced.
Yes, they mocked him specifically for making mention of your gods, meaning his condemnation of their idols. They took it personally. Here, Dicker mention means censure.
Verse 37 says, man was created of haste? What's that about?
It could describe an inherent human impatience, but also perhaps the speed of Adam's creation. It contrasts sharply with their own impatient demands in verse 38 to see the promised punishment brought on sooner.
There's an irony there.
Definitely. Then verses 39 to 41 warn about the suddenness of that punishment when it does arrive.
Verse 39 warns they won't be able to fend off the fire from their faces or backs.
A vivid image of being utterly surrounded and helpless, if only they knew what awaited them.
And verse 40 says it will come suddenly and confound them. No chance to repel it, no respite.
That unpredictability is key, linked to the fact that only God knows the hour. Commentaries note that those heedless of the Creator will be the ones most confounded, most caught off guard.
Verse 41 then offers comfort to the prophet again.
By reminding him that mockery isn't new. Messengers were certainly mocked before thee, and invariably the mockers were ultimately beset by that which they used to mock. Justice prevails.
All right, the first major section concludes with verses 42 to 47, really driving home the impotence of false gods and issuing a final warning.
It brings the argument full circle. Verse 42 asks that powerful rhetorical question. Who will protect you night and day from the compassionate, if not God himself?
Highlighting God's constant awareness and power.
And contrasting it with the disbelievers turning away from his dhikr, his remembrance or warning. While their false gods, verse 43 states, are utterly powerless even to help themselves, let alone their worshippers. No protection against us.
Verse 44 has that complex phrase about reducing the land of its outlying regions. What are the interpretations there?
It's seen in a few ways. Territorial conquest by believers is one view. Another is a loss of people and blessings from the land. And a significant one is the loss of learned sages, linking to a hadith about knowledge disappearing when scholars die.
Our spiritual decline.
Exactly. Then verse 45 reiterates the prophet's role, simply to warn you through revelation. But it adds that poignant line, the deaf do not hear the call.
A metaphor for willful ignorance.
Precisely. And verse 46 paints a chilling picture. Even a tiny breath or whiff of God's punishment would make them cry out in regret, oh, woe unto us, truly we were wrongdoers. But by then,
It's too late.
too late. This section culminates in verse 47, the promise of the day of resurrection. We shall set up just scales, Al-Muwazin al-Kazi.
Ensuring absolute fairness. No soul wronged, even by the weight of a mustard seed.
It emphasizes God's precise, comprehensive knowledge. Everything is accounted for. Commentaries debate if the scales are literal or symbolic, but the point is divine justice. It also reconciles this with verses saying some deeds have no weight, explaining that means no honor or value, not that they escape judgment. God suffices as a reckoner.
Okay, that sets the stage powerfully. Now we move into section 2, the heart of the chapter really, verses 48 to 93. This is where we get the narratives of the prophets.
Yes, a series of stories highlighting their trials, their wisdom, and God's deliverance. It shows these principles playing out in real human lives.
It starts with Moses and Aaron in verses 48 to 50.
They were given Al-Furqan, the criterion. Commentaries see this as the Torah, or maybe God's help, distinguishing truth from falsehood in their mission, and also a radiant light and a reminder for the reverent.
The light also being the Torah.
Often interpreted that way, yes.
Yeah.
Illuminating the path. And verse 49 defines those reverent people.
As those who fear their Lord unseen and are wary of the hour. What does unseen mean here?
It could mean worshiping God privately, in seclusion. Or, more deeply, knowing and fearing God through faith and reflection, not direct sight, which leads to obedience and mindfulness of the future judgment.
A beautiful description of inner piety.
It is. And verse 50 loops back, again calling the Quran a blessed reminder, Dhikr Mubarak, reinforcing that central theme of the chapter.
Next up is Abraham, and his story gets quite a bit of detail, verses 51 through 73.
A very central figure. The focus here is his challenge to idolatry and God's protection. Verse 51 says he was granted rushed, sound judgment aforetime.
Before Moses and Aaron.
Yes, interpreted either as inherent guidance from a young age or his actual prophethood. It points to his early spiritual insight.
Verses 52 to 57 describe him confronting his father and people about their idols.
Highlighting that common Quranic critique of blindly following ancestral traditions over reason and truth. The response in verse 55 is typical. Are you serious or just joking?
Echoing that incredulity again.
Exactly. But Abraham's reply in verse 56 is firm. Your Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, who originated them. He points to the true Creator, exposing the idol's impotence. Then he vows in verse 57 to scheme against them.
Setting up the famous incident?
Right, the idol-breaking ruse in verses 58 to 67. He smashes all but the largest, maybe hangs the axe on it specifically so they might turn to it for answers. A brilliant move.
Their reaction is immediate outrage in verse 59. Who did this? Which leads to Abraham being brought for questioning.
And his response in verse 63 is the masterstroke. No, the biggest one did it. Ask them if they can speak.
It's a rhetorical challenge, isn't it? Not meant as a literal deception.
Commentaries widely agree. It's a permissible ruse to expose the absurdity. It forces them to confront the fact that these idols are powerless statues.
And for a moment, they seem to get it. Verse 64 says they turn to themselves, saying, "You are the wrongdoers."
A flash of insight. But then, verse 65, they immediately relapse. But you know they don't speak, revealing that deep cognitive dissonance, that stubborn refusal to abandon falsehood, even when confronted with its absurdity.
Leading to Abraham's final condemnation in verses 66 and 67.
Fie upon you and what you worship, expressing that deep disgust and frustration at their willful blindness.
Their response, to try and burn him, verse 68.
Burn him and help your gods. Commentaries elaborate on the huge fire they built and Abraham's steadfast prayer.
And then the miracle in verse 69.
God's command, O fire, be coolness and peace for Abraham. A stunning display of divine power over the elements. Interpretations vary on how heat removed, Abraham protected, a barrier, but the result is miraculous deliverance.
Verse 70 says God made his opponents the greatest losers.
Their scheme failed utterly. Then Abraham and Lot are delivered in verse 71 to the blessed land, maybe the Levant, maybe Makkah, symbolizing safety and the start of a blessed lineage.
And God grants him Isaac and Jacob as an added gift in verse 72.
Making them righteous, and verse 73 calls them imams, guiding according to our command, teaching good deeds, prayer, charity, true worshipers.
Following Abraham, we briefly hear about Lot in verses 74 and 75.
He received judgment and knowledge and was saved from his town, the one committing vile deeds. It underscores the consequences of widespread moral corruption.
And his entry into God's mercy in verse 75.
Interpreted as his prophethood or his salvation and reward in the hereafter. Divine favor.
Then the timeline shifts back briefly to Noah, pre-Abraham, in verses 76 and 77.
Right. He cried out aforetime, facing denial, and God answered, saving him and his family from the great distress, both the flood and the constant mockery.
And verse 77 says God helped him against those who denied the signs.
By drowning them. A stark reminder of the fate awaiting those who persistently reject divine warnings.
Next, David and Solomon, verses 78 to 82. Their stories focus on wisdom and special gifts.
Verse 78 starts with that incident about sheep damaging crops. It's a case study in judgment.
And verse 79 says God made Solomon understand it better.
Implying Solomon's judgment was perhaps wiser, or was the one divinely preferred, even if David initially judged differently. This brings up theological discussions about ijtihad independent reasoning by prophets, and whether one prophet's judgment could be superseded or refined by divine inspiration given to another, or if Solomon's was an abrogation.
Fascinating. Verse 79 also mentions the mountains and birds glorifying God along with David.
A beautiful image of cosmic harmony, creation resonating with the prophet's devotion. A special miracle emphasizing his connection.
Then verse 80, David being taught to make armor.
Garments to protect you against your own might, meaning the violence of battle. A practical divine gift requiring gratitude.
And Solomon's gifts, verse 81 mentions controlling the wind.
Subjecting the powerful wind to run by his command, specifically towards the blessed land, demonstrating his miraculous dominion.
And verse 82 talks about the jinn working for him.
Satan's here likely refers to powerful jinn. They dove for pearls, built structures, did other tasks, and crucially, God guarded them, meaning he kept the jinn in check or preserved their work from corruption.
The chapter then continues this pattern with several other prophets, verses 83 to 93, each offering lessons in patience, prayer, or illustrating miracles.
A rich tapestry of examples. Job comes first, verses 83 and 84, the epitome of patience.
He cries out in verse 83, "Truly affliction has befallen me, and thou art the most merciful."
Acknowledging his suffering but affirming God's mercy. His story, familiar from biblical accounts too, involves immense loss testing his faith. But God answers in verse 84, removes the affliction, restores his family, and the like thereof with them.
As a mercy and a reminder to the worshipers.
A reminder of the reward for patience and unwavering faith.
Then verses 85 and 86 group Ishmael, Idris, and Dul-Kifl together.
As examples of the patient, Olabirin, Idris is often identified with Enoch, sometimes Elias or Hermes in different traditions. Dul-Kifl is less certain, a just man, maybe a title for Zechariah or Joshua. Some even suggest the Buddha based on certain interpretations, though that's less mainstream.
And God caused them to enter our mercy.
Again, meaning paradise or divine favor and protection.
Next is Jonah Dul-Nun, the man of the fish, in verses 87 and 88.
He went away in anger, maybe frustrated with his people or with God's mercy towards Nineveh. His thought, we had no power over him, is debated did he doubt God's reach or his mercy.
But his prayer from the darkness is iconic.
There is no God but thee. Glory be to thee. Truly I have been among the wrongdoers. Utter repentance from the depths, plural darknesses, fish, sea, night.
And God answers, saving him from grief in verse 88 with the promise, thus do we save the believers.
Sufi commentaries emphasize the sincerity and surrender here. True repentance brings true liberation.
Then Zechariah and John, verses 89 and 90, a story of longing and answered prayer.
Zechariah pleads in verse 89, My Lord, leave me not childless, desiring an heir, but affirming God as the best of inheritors.
God answers in verse 90, granting him John and making his wife, previously barren, able to conceive.
And the verse praises them, perhaps this family, perhaps all these prophets for vying in good deeds, calling on God with desire and fear, and being humble, a model of balanced devotion.
Finally, verse 91 refers to Mary.
She who preserved her chastity, into whom God breathed our spirit, making her and her son a sign for the worlds.
The virgin birth of Jesus.
Clearly, presented as a dual sign involving both Mary's purity and miraculous conception and Jesus' unique existence. Breathing our spirit signifies the direct bestowal of life by God, similar to Adam's creation, bypassing normal means.
Okay, that brings us to the final section, verses 94 to 1 and 12. This seems to circle back to the themes from the beginning, the true promise, the consequences, and the core message of unity.
Exactly. It ties everything together. Verses 92 and 93 start with that fundamental principle of unity.
Verse 92. Truly this community of yours is one community, and I am your Lord, so worship me.
Emphasizing the single, unified message brought by all prophets, one path, one God. But verse 93 acknowledges the reality. Humans fragmented their affair, creating divisions and sects despite the unified source.
Verse 94 then offers assurance about deeds.
Whosoever performs righteous deeds and is a believer, there shall be no ingratitude for his endeavor. God recognizes and records every good act. Justice and reward are guaranteed.
And verse 95 about the destroyed towns not returning.
It is forbidden unto any town we have destroyed that they should ever return. The Arabic implies a double negative, meaning they will inevitably return, but only for judgment in the hereafter, not back to worldly life or repentance. Their chance is gone.
Then the focus shifts dramatically to the signs of the hour itself, verses 96 to 104, starting with Gog and Magog.
Verse 96 mentions their unleashing from every hill as a major sign of the end. Their appearance signals in verse 97 that the true promise is near,
causing horror among disbelievers.
a fixed stare of regret. Oh, woe unto us! We were heedless, we were wrongdoers. Realization dawns, but too late. Spiritually, Gog and Magog can also represent that overwhelming internal chaos distracting the soul.
Verses 98 to 100 then address the idolaters directly.
Surely you and that which you worship apart from God shall be fuel for hell. A stark fate for both worshippers and their idols, using that which emphasizes the inanimate nature of the idols.
Though later verses clarify this doesn't apply to righteous figures like Jesus or angels who are worshipped against their will.
Correct. Verse 99 highlights the idol's impotence. Had these been gods, they wouldn't end up in hell. Both worshipper and worshipped share the fate. And verse 100 describes their state in hell, groaning, unable to hear anything, ultimate isolation, mirroring their deafness to truth and life.
But then verses 101 to 104 offer the contrast.
The saved.
Those for whom what is most beautiful has already gone forth from us, they shall be kept far from it hell. Those destined for paradise, preordained by grace, or those like Jesus' angels falsely worshipped. Sufis might see this as the elect, the saints. Verse 102 says they won't even hear the slightest sound of hell, abiding blissfully in paradise.
Experiencing that which their souls desire. Spiritual fulfillment, closeness to God. And verse 103 adds, the greatest terror will not grieve them.
The horrors of Judgment Day won't affect them.
Whether that's the final trumpet, the fire, or death itself, they are secure. Angels will welcome them. This is your day.
Verse 104 describes the end of the current cosmos.
We shall roll up the sky like the rolling of scrolls. A powerful image of cosmic dissolution or transformation, followed by the guarantee. As we began the first creation, so shall we bring it back. Resurrection is certain, back to that original state, barefoot, naked, uncircumcised, a binding promise.
Verses 105 and 106 talk about inheritance.
We have written in the Psalms, Al-Zabur, after the reminder, Al-Dik, that my righteous servants shall inherit the earth. Zabur could mean David's Psalms or all prophetic books, Dikr, the celestial archetype.
And the earth, paradise, or this world.
Interpretations differ. either the celestial garden or the lands of disbelievers inherited by the righteous community, specifically the followers of Muhammad. Verse 106 calls this a proclamation for a worshipful people, perhaps the prophet's community, or those who worship out of pure love.
And that leads perfectly into the final verses, 107 to 112, the conclusion of the chapter.
A powerful conclusion, focusing on the Prophet Muhammad's role and the essence of the message. Verse 107 is incredibly profound.
And we sent thee not, save as a mercy unto the worlds, Ramatan Littleman.
A defining statement of his universal mission. Commentaries explore this mercy deeply. God's act in sending him is the mercy, or he embodies mercy. It extends to all beings, humans, and jinn. Unlike previous prophets' opponents, his weren't utterly destroyed. It also relates to his role of intercession.
Verses 108 and 109 then summarize the core message he brings.
He's told to declare in verse 108, "It is only revealed unto me that your God is one God, so will you be submitters." That's Tawhid in a nutshell, the call to Islam, submission.
And if they refuse?
Verse 109, "I have proclaimed to you all equally. I know not whether that which you are promised is nigh or far off." He's just the messenger. No secret knowledge, the timing is God's alone. Equally might also imply a fair warning before conflict.
The final verses affirm God's knowledge and end with a plea.
Verse 1 and 10, "He knows what's spoken openly and what you conceal." Total omniscience. Verse 111 has the prophet state, "I know not. Perhaps the delay in punishment is a trial for you and an enjoyment for a while."
The delay itself is a test.
Or a temporary reprieve, allowing them more time, which might ultimately increase their accountability if they persist in denial.
And the very last verse, 1 and 12.
The prophet's concluding prayer. "My Lord, judge with truth. Our Lord is the compassionate, the one whose help is sought against that which you ascribe. A plea for justice against their false accusations," sorcerer, poet, "and their blasphemies, claiming God has a child. A final appeal for truth to prevail."
Wow. That's quite a journey through Al-Anbiya. So bringing it all together, what's the key takeaway for you, our listener?
Well, this deep dive shows it's not just a collection of prophet stories. It's this intricate tapestry, right? Woven with themes of divine unity, our accountability, the absolute certainty of judgment, and how truth ultimately overcomes falsehood.
Yeah, it constantly juxtaposes human flaws, heedlessness, arrogance with divine attributes like wisdom and omnipotence. And it all culminates in that powerful affirmation of God's oneness and the Prophet Muhammad as this universal mercy.
But here's what I find really interesting thinking about it now. The core insight isn't just what the prophets taught. It's also how their struggles, particularly against that stubborn incredulity, how much that mirrors our own, daily battles with distraction, denial, maybe avoiding the tough questions.
That's a great point. This chapter almost forces us to ask ourselves, what reckoning, big or small, are we maybe being heedless of in our own lives? And how can we cultivate that reverence, that mindful awareness the chapter talks about?
Exactly. So as you reflect on these timeless messages in Al-Anbiya, maybe consider what new questions bubble up for you. Questions about human nature, about divine justice, or maybe about your own path, your own journey of submission, whatever that looks like for you.
We really hope you'll revisit this powerful chapter, delve deeper into its teachings. It truly is a journey worth taking. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.